Robert's young Filipino bride vanished with everything he owned just 7 days after their dream wedding, leaving only an empty bed and a drained bank account. Then a letter arrived that would shatter everything he thought he knew about love, family, and the woman who destroyed his life while claiming to save it. Robert's hands trembled uncontrollably as he read Elena's letter for the third time. The expensive Manila hotel stationery now crumpled from his desperate grip. The words swam before his eyes in the cramped Manila post office, where Mang Carlos had just handed him the envelope that would shatter everything he thought he knew about love and betrayal. My dearest Robert, by the time you read this letter, I will be far from Manila. I know you must hate me now, and I understand why. I know you must think everything between us was a lie. But please believe me when I say that loving you was the only true thing in my life these past 2 years. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects as Robert sank into the plastic chair beside the counter. 7 days ago, he had married Elena in a sunset ceremony on the beaches of Palawan. 7 days ago, he had been the happiest man alive, finally finding love at 55 with a woman who made him feel 25 again. Now his bank account showed 0, his bride was gone, and this letter was all that remained of his shattered dreams. Robert, there are things about my family that I could never tell you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I was trying to protect you from it. My father, he never told us about the debts. When he got sick 2 years ago, he borrowed money from the wrong people. Not banks, Robert. People who don't forgive and don't forget. The morning sun streamed through the dirty windows, casting long shadows across the cramped space filled with the smell of old paper and bureaucracy. Other customers came and went, conducting the normal business of life while Robert's world collapsed around him. He remembered Elena's voice on their video calls, how she'd cried when telling him about her father's illness, how grateful she'd been when Robert sent money for the medical bills.
$22,000.
He'd thought he was saving a life. Now he wondered if he'd been financing his own deception. They wanted 800,000 pesos, Robert. That's almost $30,000. Money we could never have in our lifetime. Papa had borrowed it for his surgery, and the interest kept growing and growing. They gave us 6 months to pay or they would kill him. Not just kill him, they would make us watch. Then they would take my sisters. Robert's wedding ring caught the light as his hands shook. The same ring Elena had slipped onto his finger with tears in her eyes, promising to love him forever. The same hands that had caressed his face on their wedding night, whispering how blessed she felt to be his wife. Every moment of tenderness now felt tainted, every declaration of love now suspect. But something happened that I didn't expect, Robert. I fell in love with you, really, truly in love. Not with your money or what you could do for my family. With you. With the way you made me laugh, with how gently you held my hand when we walked through Intramuros, with how you listened when I talked about my dreams. The post office felt too small, too hot. Robert stood abruptly, pacing the narrow space as Mang Carlos watched with kind but knowing eyes. This wasn't the first time the old postmaster had seen a foreign man destroyed by a Filipino woman's disappearance. The pattern was old, predictable, heartbreaking in its repetition. But something about this letter felt different. Elena's words carried a desperation that went beyond simple con artistry. I wanted to tell you everything, Robert. So many times I almost did. But I was scared you would leave, and then my family would die, and I would lose the man I love. I thought maybe I could take just enough to save Papa. I thought maybe we could start fresh afterward, and I would never have to tell you about the darkness in my past. Robert remembered their wedding night in the villa. How Elena had clung to him with a desperation he'd attributed to passion. How she'd whispered apologies in Tagalog when she thought he was sleeping. How she'd traced the lines of his face like she was memorizing them. Had she already known what morning would bring? Had she been saying goodbye even as they made love? But on our wedding night, everything changed. The men came again. They had found out I was married to an American. They knew you had money. They didn't want just the original debt anymore. They wanted double. They wanted to own me, Robert. They said if I didn't bring them more money, they would kill Papa, take my sisters, and come for you too. The words hit Robert like physical blows. He'd been angry about the money, about the deception, about the humiliation. But the thought of Elena living in fear, of her family under threat of death, added layers of complexity to his pain that he wasn't prepared for. This wasn't just about a gold digger taking advantage of a lonely old man. This was about survival, about impossible choices made in desperation. I couldn't let them hurt you, Robert. You came to the Philippines looking for love, not for war. You didn't sign up to have your life threatened because you fell in love with the wrong woman. So I took the money, all of it, and I paid them. I paid them everything. It was the only way to keep you safe. It was the only way to keep Papa alive. It was the only way to free my sisters from this nightmare. Robert looked around the busy post office, watching ordinary people conducting ordinary business, and felt completely disconnected from their world. His reality had become something from a crime novel: loan sharks, death threats, midnight escapes. He was a factory supervisor from Ohio, not someone who dealt with international danger. Yet here he was, holding a letter that suggested he'd been seconds away from violence he couldn't have imagined. I know you will never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I know you trusted me with your heart and your future, and I broke that trust. I know you saved that money for years, working extra shifts and giving up things you wanted. I know I stole more than money from you. I stole your dreams of a new life, your faith in love, your trust in people. The truth of Elena's words cut deeper than any anger could reach. Robert had indeed worked those extra shifts, had skipped vacations and lived frugally for years to save money for retirement, for travel, for a new beginning. He'd given it all to Elena willingly, gladly, thinking he was investing in their shared future. Now he was stranded in a foreign country with maxed-out credit cards and no way home. I left something for you at my sister Carmen's house in Barangay San Miguel. She lives behind the yellow sari-sari store near the elementary school. Ask for Carmen Reyes. She will know you are coming. Robert, I owe you an explanation for everything. Carmen has it. What I left there will help you understand why I had to choose my family's lives over our love. Hope flickered in Robert's chest like a dying candle. Carmen. He'd spoken to her many times during video calls with Elena. A warm woman with 3 children, always smiling, always welcoming him to the family. If Elena had left something with Carmen, maybe there were answers waiting. Maybe some proof of this incredible story about loan sharks and death threats. Maybe something to help him understand whether any of Elena's love had been real. Before I go, there is one more thing you need to know. Something I discovered the morning I left. Check your email, Robert. The address I sent Carmen will forward you a message I wrote but couldn't send myself. What I found out that morning changed everything again. It made leaving even harder, but also more necessary. Robert's phone buzzed as if summoned by Elena's words. An email notification from carmeniris24@gmail.com. Subject: From Elena, for Robert. His finger hovered over the screen, trembling with the weight of possibility and dread. Whatever secret Elena had discovered on their last morning together was waiting in that message, ready to complicate an already impossible situation. I love you, Robert. I will always love you.
Elena.
As Mang Carlos quietly offered him a glass of water, Robert stared at Elena's signature, her name written with the same flourish he'd seen on their marriage certificate. The woman who had promised to love him forever had vanished into the chaos of Manila, leaving behind only questions and a mystery that seemed to grow more complex with each revelation. The post office hummed with normal life around him, packages being mailed, forms being filled out, the mundane business of existence continuing while Robert's world lay in ruins. But Elena's letter had done something he hadn't expected. It had transformed his simple story of betrayal into something far more complicated. Something that demanded answers, demanded understanding, demanded he travel deeper into a world he didn't understand to learn the truth about the woman who had broken his heart while claiming to save his life. 3 days in Manila had passed like a fever dream of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. Robert sat in the cramped internet cafe near Elena's family's neighborhood, the smell of instant coffee and cigarette smoke making his head pound. His search through Elena's social media had yielded nothing. Her accounts were deleted, erased as if she had never existed at all. The photos of their courtship, their engagement, their wedding, all gone. It was like someone had taken an eraser to his entire life. The walk to the local post office felt different this morning. Robert had checked his email compulsively, called Elena's family members who suddenly couldn't speak English, visited every place she had mentioned liking in Manila. Nothing. But something about this morning felt different, like the air before a storm. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was hope refusing to die completely. Mang Carlos, the postmaster, was sorting mail behind a wooden counter scarred with decades of use. The small building smelled of old paper and humidity, with yellow water stains painting abstract patterns on the white walls. Robert had become a daily visitor, checking for anything, a postcard, a letter, any sign that Elena remembered he existed. Mang Carlos looked up with kind eyes that had probably seen too many broken hearts over the years. "Ah, Mr. Robert," the old man said, his English careful but warm. "Today, something is here for you." Robert's heart hammered against his ribs as Mang Carlos handed him a white envelope. His name was written in Elena's distinctive handwriting, each letter formed with the careful precision she brought to everything she did. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, and the return address showed a hotel in Manila. Not just any hotel, the Manila Peninsula. The kind of place where a single night cost more than most Filipinos made in a year. Robert's hands shook so violently he could barely open the envelope. Inside was hotel stationery, crisp and white with gold-embossed letters. Elena's handwriting filled both sides of the page, her words flowing like water. But as Robert began to read, each sentence felt like another stone dropped into the pit of his stomach. "My dearest Robert, by the time you read this letter, I will be far from Manila. I know you must hate me now, and I understand why. I know you must think everything between us was a lie. But please believe me when I say that loving you was the only true thing in my life these past 2 years. I never meant for things to end this way. I prayed every night that there would be another way, but there wasn't." Robert sank into a plastic chair beside the counter, the letter trembling in his hands. Mang Carlos quietly offered him a glass of water, but Robert barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on Elena's words, trying to find some explanation that could make sense of this betrayal. "Robert, there are things about my family that I could never tell you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I was trying to protect you from it. My father, he never told us about the debts. When he got sick 2 years ago, he borrowed money from the wrong people. Not banks, Robert. People who don't forgive and don't forget. They came to our house while you were in Ohio. They showed us pictures of what they do to families who can't pay." The words blurred as Robert's eyes filled with tears. He blinked them away, desperate to understand. Around him, the post office hummed with normal life. People mailing packages, buying stamps, conducting the small business of daily existence. But Robert felt like he was drowning in Elena's words. "They wanted 800,000 pesos, Robert. That's almost $30,000. Money we could never have in our lifetime. Papa had borrowed it for his surgery, and the interest kept growing and growing. They gave us 6 months to pay or they would kill him. Not just kill him, they would make us watch. Then they would take my sisters. They showed us what they had done to other families who couldn't pay." Robert's hands gripped the letter so tightly the paper began to tear at the edges. The rational part of his mind tried to process this information. Loan sharks, death threats, a family trapped by circumstances beyond their control. But the emotional part of him still felt the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of being used. "I tried everything, Robert. I worked 3 jobs. My sisters and I sold everything we owned. But it wasn't enough. Then I met you on that dating site, and you were so kind, so generous. You talked about your house in Ohio, your savings, your retirement. You said you wanted to take care of someone. I saw a chance to save my family, and I know that makes me a terrible person." The fluorescent lights above hummed like angry insects. Robert's shirt stuck to his back with sweat, but he felt cold inside. Elena's words painted a picture of desperation he had never imagined. In Ohio, $30,000 was a significant sum but not devastating. Here it was literally life and death. "But something happened that I didn't expect, Robert. I fell in love with you. Really, truly in love. Not with your money or what you could do for my family. With you. With the way you made me laugh. with how gently you held my hand when we walked through Intramuros, with how you listened when I talked about my dreams. I fell in love with your kindness, your patience with my broken English, the way you cried during our wedding ceremony. Robert remembered that moment clearly, standing at the altar in Elena's village church, looking at her in her white dress, feeling tears streaming down his face. He had been so happy, so grateful, so sure that he had finally found his person. The memory now felt like a wound being reopened. I wanted to tell you everything, Robert. So many times I almost did. But I was scared you would leave, and then my family would die, and I would lose the man I love. I thought maybe I could take just enough to save Papa. I thought maybe we could start fresh afterward, and I would never have to tell you about the darkness in my past. A customer entered the post office, chatting loudly on a cell phone. Mang Carlos served them while Robert continued reading, the sounds around him fading into background noise. His world had narrowed to Elena's words, each one cutting deeper than the last. But on our wedding night, everything changed. The men came again. They had found out I was married to an American. They knew you had money. They didn't want just the original debt anymore. They wanted double. They wanted to own me, Robert. They said if I didn't bring them more money, they would kill Papa, take my sisters, and come for you too. They knew where you lived in Ohio. They had done research. Robert's blood turned to ice. These weren't just local criminals Elena was talking about. These were people with connections, with resources. People who could reach across oceans to destroy lives. The scope of what Elena had been facing began to dawn on him, and with it came a sick understanding of why she had run. I couldn't let them hurt you, Robert. You came to the Philippines looking for love, not for war. You didn't sign up to have your life threatened because you fell in love with the wrong woman. So I took the money, all of it, and I paid them. I paid them everything. It was the only way to keep you safe. It was the only way to keep Papa alive. It was the only way to free my sisters from this nightmare. The letter shook in Robert's hands. He looked up at Mang Carlos, who was pretending not to watch but clearly concerned about the American man falling apart in his post office. Robert wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But there was more to read. I know you will never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I know you trusted me with your heart and your future, and I broke that trust. I know you saved that money for years, working extra shifts and giving up things you wanted. I know I stole more than money from you. I stole your dreams of a new life, your faith in love, your trust in people. I hate myself for that every single day. Robert stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the concrete floor. He walked to the small window, looking out at the busy street beyond. Jeepneys honked their way through traffic. Vendors pushed carts loaded with fruit. Children played in the narrow spaces between buildings. Life continued, normal and chaotic, while his world crumbled in his hands. But Robert, I need you to know that loving you was not a lie. Our conversations that lasted until dawn were not lies. The way I felt when you held me was not a lie. When I promised to love you forever during our wedding, I meant every word. I still mean every word. You gave me 3 years of happiness I had never imagined possible. You made me believe I deserved love, kindness, respect. You treated me like I was precious. The words were becoming harder to read through his tears. Robert didn't care who saw him crying anymore. Let them think what they wanted. Let them assume he was just another foolish foreigner who had been swindled by a local woman. The truth was so much more complicated than that. I don't know where I will go or what I will do now. I can never come home. There are too many people who might recognize me, who might ask questions. I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if I did the right thing. But at least Papa is alive. At least my sisters are safe. At least you are safe. And maybe someday you will understand that everything I did out of love. The letter was almost over, but Robert wasn't ready for it to end. As long as he was reading Elena's words, part of her was still with him. Part of their story was still alive. He gripped the paper like a lifeline in a storm. I left something for you at my sister Carmen's house in Barangay San Miguel. She lives behind the yellow sari-sari store near the elementary school. Ask for Carmen Reyes. She will know you are coming. Robert, I owe you an explanation for everything. Carmen has it. What I left there will help you understand why I had to choose my family's lives over our love. It will show you proof of everything I've told you. Robert's heart raced. Proof. Evidence. Something concrete to help him make sense of this nightmare. Maybe Carmen would have answers. Maybe she would know where Elena had gone. Maybe she could help him figure out what to do next. The neighborhood name was familiar. Elena had mentioned her sister Carmen many times, talking about her children, her husband who worked on cargo ships. I pray that someday you will find love again, Robert. Real love with someone who can give you the peace and happiness you deserve. Someone who doesn't come with debts and threats and impossible choices. You are a good man, Robert Campbell. The best man I have ever known. Please don't let what I did make you stop believing in love. Don't let me make you stop believing in people. The final paragraph was shorter, written in slightly different ink as if Elena had stopped writing and returned to add it later. Robert could picture her in some anonymous hotel room, struggling with how to end this letter that was both goodbye and explanation. Before I go, there is one more thing you need to know. Something I discovered the morning I left. Check your email, Robert. The address I sent Carmen will forward you a message I wrote but couldn't send myself. What I found out that morning changed everything again. It made leaving even harder but also more necessary. Carmen will explain. I love you, Robert. I will always love you.
Elena.
Robert stared at the signature, her name written with a flourish he recognized from grocery lists and birthday cards. His hands were shaking so badly now that he could barely fold the letter back up. Email. She had sent him an email through Carmen. Another message waiting to complicate this already impossible situation. Mang Carlos approached carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. Sir, you are okay? You need to sit down. Robert nodded, letting the older man guide him back to the chair. The post office felt too small, too hot, too full of air that he couldn't quite catch in his lungs. Elena's words echoed in his mind. Death threats, loan sharks, impossible choices, protecting him, loving him, leaving him. The letter had answered some questions but raised a dozen more. Sir, Mang Carlos said gently, many foreign men come here with broken hearts, but not all stories are the same. Some women, they take money and laugh. Some women, they take money because they have no choice. You must find out which kind your wife is. Robert looked up at the postmaster, this kind stranger who had just delivered the most important letter of his life. How do I do that?
Mang Carlos, my Sally.
You go to Barangay San Miguel. You talk to the sister. You learn the whole truth. Then you decide if you forgive or if you forget. Both are okay choices, sir. But you must know the truth first. Robert's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at the screen and saw a new email from an address he didn't recognize. carmeniris24@gmail.com. The subject line was simple. From Elena, for Robert. His finger hovered over the message, afraid of what other devastation might be waiting inside. But he knew he had to read it. He had to know the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt. The busy sounds of Manila filtered through the post office windows, traffic, voices, music from passing radios. Life moving forward while Robert sat frozen between his past and an uncertain future. Elena was gone, but her story was still unfolding. And somehow, impossibly, there was more to discover about the woman who had broken his heart while claiming to save his life. Robert couldn't believe what Carmen's shaking hands revealed from the shoebox. His wife's secret marriage certificate to another man, dated 6 months before their own wedding ceremony. As the rain hammered against the corrugated roof of the cramped Manila house, Carmen's tear-stained cheeks told a story that would shatter everything Robert thought he knew about love, betrayal, and the desperate lengths people go to survive. The narrow living room felt suffocating as tropical humidity mixed with the scent of cooking rice and burning incense from the religious altar. Carmen gestured for Robert to sit on the worn plastic sofa, where generations of families had shared their burdens. Children's laughter echoed from the upper floor, a cruel contrast to the heavy silence that filled the space between them. The walls, painted in faded yellow, seemed to close in as Carmen began to unpack the contents of the shoebox with trembling fingers. "Miguel is not a good man," Carmen whispered, glancing nervously at the open window. "When he left for Dubai to work construction, we thought Elena was finally free. But he came back early. He knows about you." The weight of her words settled in Robert's chest like stones. Each document she pulled from the box felt like a physical blow. Wedding photos showed Elena in a simple white dress, standing beside a thick-set man with cold eyes and calloused hands. The dates made Robert's stomach turn. These pictures were taken while Elena was video calling him every night, telling him how much she loved him. Bank transfer receipts showed exactly where Robert's money had gone. $50,000, transferred in 3 separate payments to different accounts. But it wasn't greed that had driven Elena to take the money. Carmen explained through broken English and desperate hand gestures how their father, a gentleman who once drove a jeepney for a living, had borrowed money from loan sharks to pay for their mother's cancer treatment. When she died anyway, the debt remained. The interest grew like a cancer itself, doubling, tripling, until the family owed an impossible amount. "They broke Papa's fingers first," Carmen said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Then they said they would take my daughter, my little Maria. She's only 7 years old." The words hung in the air like a curse. Robert felt his anger dissolving into something more complicated, more painful. This wasn't just about him being scammed. This was about survival, about family, about choices no one should ever have to make. The pregnancy test at the bottom of the box changed everything. 2 pink lines, clear as day. Carmen's eyes filled with fresh tears as she handed it to Robert. "She doesn't know if it's yours or Miguel's," she whispered. "She was with him once, when he came back early from Dubai. He forced her. But she was with you too, around the same time." The plastic stick felt impossibly heavy in Robert's hands. Somewhere in Manila, Elena was carrying a child that might be his, while hiding from a man who believed he was the father. Carmen pulled out a cell phone, old and cracked but still functional. "She waits for your call every day at 4 o'clock. She goes to a different internet cafe each time, afraid Miguel is watching. He has friends everywhere in the city. Men who work construction, men who drive tricycles, men who sell cigarettes on street corners. They all know her face now." The phone seemed to burn in Robert's palm. One call could change everything. One call could put her in danger. "Why didn't she tell me?" Robert asked, his voice cracking with emotion. Carmen's answer came slowly, each word carefully chosen. "Because she loves you. She thought if you knew the truth, you would leave." "And then what?" "Miguel would find out about the baby. He would. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Robert understood the threat that hung over Elena's head like a sword. As if summoned by their conversation, Carmen's daughter Maria appeared at the top of the stairs, her school uniform wet from the rain. She had Elena's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at Robert with such tenderness just weeks ago. Maria smiled shyly and waved before disappearing into a bedroom. The innocence of the gesture struck Robert like lightning. This was why Elena had made her choice. Not for money, not for herself, but for Maria, for their father, for all of them. Carmen showed him pictures on her phone from recent weeks. Elena, visibly pregnant now, working at a small restaurant in Quezon City. She looked exhausted, constantly looking over her shoulder. In one photo, a bruise darkened her left cheek. "Miguel found her last week," Carmen explained. "She convinced him the baby was his, but he's suspicious. He's watching her all the time now." The phone started ringing. 4 o'clock exactly. Carmen looked at Robert with pleading eyes. "Will you talk to her? She needs to know you understand. She needs to know you forgive her." But as Robert reached for the phone, the sound of motorcycles roared outside. Carmen's face went white with terror. "They're here," she whispered. "Miguel's men. He knows you're in the city." The phone kept ringing in Robert's hand as voices shouted outside in rapid Tagalog, closer and closer to the front door. The phone call arranged a meeting that Elena knew could be her last chance to explain everything before Miguel discovered the truth about the baby and destroyed what remained of her life. When Robert saw her across the crowded cafe near Resall Park, her hand protectively resting on her swollen belly, he realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a child's future, and possibly their lives. Elena had chosen the busiest cafe in Manila on purpose, surrounded by office workers and students, where conversations blended into white noise and security cameras captured every angle. She sat in the corner, baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses hiding eyes that Robert remembered being bright with laughter during their video calls. Now those same eyes darted nervously between the entrance and the windows, watching for familiar faces that meant danger. The yellow maternity dress she wore was simple but clean, though Robert noticed the frayed edges that spoke of financial struggle. Her pregnancy was clearly showing now, impossible to hide. "You came," she said, voice barely above a whisper as Robert took the seat across from her. Up close, he could see the stress written in every line of her face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook as she lifted her coffee cup. The wedding ring he had placed on her finger weeks ago was gone, replaced by a thin gold band that looked older, more worn. "I wasn't sure you would. Carmen said you read my letter." Her English was still perfect, but her accent seemed thicker now, as if she was too tired to maintain the careful pronunciation she had practiced during their long-distance courtship. Robert struggled to find words that weren't accusations. "I saw everything. The documents, the bank transfers, the pregnancy test. Is it true? All of it?" Elena nodded slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "Miguel thinks this baby is his. We were together once, just once, when he came back from Dubai early. He caught me coming home from meeting you at your hotel. He was angry, jealous. He forced himself on me, said he had to mark his territory before your wedding." The words came out flat, emotionless, as if she had practiced them many times in preparation for this moment. "But you were my wife," Robert said, pain evident in his voice. "You married me. You took my money. You made me believe." Elena cut him off, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I am married to you. In my heart, that ceremony meant everything to me. But Miguel, that marriage was arranged when I was 17. My parents needed money. His family needed legal documents to work overseas. It was supposed to be temporary, just papers. But then he came back, and the debt collectors came, and everything became so complicated." She pulled out a smartphone and showed him photos. Her father in a hospital bed, his hands wrapped in bandages. Her young cousin Maria with a school ID card, attending a private school. "Your $50,000 saved my father's life and gave my family 6 months of safety. But it's not enough forever. Miguel's friends, they work for dangerous people. People who own politicians, who own police. They don't forget debts." The cafe noise seemed to fade as Elena continued her story, each revelation more devastating than the last. "I got pregnant right after our wedding night," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I knew it could be yours because of the timing. Miguel had been gone for 3 months before that night when he hurt me, but I can't be sure. The baby could belong to either of you." Robert felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. The possibility that this child could be his changed everything. It wasn't just about the money anymore, or even about Elena's deception. There was an innocent life at stake. A man at a nearby table stood up suddenly, and Elena flinched, her entire body tensing. But he was just leaving after finishing his lunch. Elena exhaled slowly, her fear palpable. "Miguel has been watching me. He knows I've been hiding something. Last week he found text messages on my old phone. He didn't see everything, but he knows I was in contact with someone. He's been following me, trying to find out who." She showed Robert a bruise on her wrist, partially covered by makeup. "He did this when I wouldn't tell him about the messages. Why don't you just leave?" Robert asked desperately. "I have friends in America who could help. We could go back together, you and the baby." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Leave? And go where? Miguel's family has connections everywhere. And my family. If I disappear, they'll take their anger out on Carmen, on my father, on little Maria. You don't understand how it works here. Family debt doesn't disappear when one person runs away. It just gets passed to someone else. 2 motorcycles pulled up outside the cafe, and Elena's face went white. We have to go. Now. She stood quickly, moving toward the back exit. Robert threw money on the table and followed her. In the alley behind the cafe, Elena turned to face him one last time. I need you to know something, Robert. When I said I loved you, I meant it. Everything I felt for you was real. The marriage ceremony, the promises I made, the dreams I shared with you about the future. All of that was true. This baby. She placed her hand on her stomach. This baby was made from love, not obligation. Whether it's yours or not, it was created on our wedding night, when I was the happiest I had ever been. The sound of men shouting in Tagalog echoed from the street. Elena kissed Robert on the cheek, a quick, desperate gesture. If something happens to me, promise me you'll check on my family. Carmen knows where I hide my money. Make sure Maria finishes school. She pressed a piece of paper into his hand with an address written in neat handwriting. That's where I'm staying now. If you don't hear from me in 3 days, go there. Ask for Rosa. Tell her Elena sent you. The motorcycles were getting louder, voices calling her name. Elena looked at Robert one last time, memorizing his face. I have to go. For the baby's sake, I have to go. She disappeared into the maze of Manila's back alleys, leaving Robert standing alone with more questions than answers, and the terrifying realization that the mother of what might be his child could disappear forever into a city of 12 million people. 3 months later, sweat dripped down Robert's forehead in a small internet cafe in Cebu City. The broken ceiling fans struggled against the humid air, while Filipino teenagers gamed loudly at nearby computers. But Robert barely noticed the noise as he stared at an email that made his hands shake with both fear and hope. The subject line read, "From Elena. Please read immediately." He'd been living in a cheap apartment above a bakery, spending his days teaching English to local kids for barely enough money to survive. His wedding ring had been pawned weeks ago to pay rent. Every morning, he woke up hoping to forget Elena existed, but every night, he dreamed of her holding a baby with his eyes. The torment was eating him alive from the inside. With trembling fingers, Robert clicked the email. Elena's message was short but devastating. Robert, I'm in Canada now, safe with my daughter. Her name is Sophia. I'm sending you a photo. Please look at her carefully. Then decide if you want to know the truth about who her father really is. Attached was a single photo. Robert's heart stopped completely as the image loaded pixel by pixel. A beautiful baby girl with thick black hair and unmistakably familiar green eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like his own father's, like his own reflection in the mirror each morning. The baby was wearing a tiny pink dress and had Elena's nose, but everything else screamed Robert's genetics. His chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor as he stood up abruptly, causing other cafe customers to look his way. Robert didn't care. He stumbled outside into the blazing afternoon sun, his mind spinning with impossible emotions. Was this child really his? How could he be sure? And what was Elena asking him to do about it? Back inside, another email had arrived. This one contained no words, just a document attachment. With shaking hands, Robert downloaded it onto the public computer. It was a DNA paternity test request form, already filled out with his information and Elena's address in Toronto. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Elena's careful script. I used the hair from your brush. If you want to know for certain, send a sample of yours to this lab. I'll pay for everything. I just thought you deserved the choice to know. Robert's anger flared hot in his chest. She'd stolen his hair for a DNA test? But then reality hit him like a truck. If she'd wanted to hide the truth, why would she reach out at all? Why show him the baby's photo? Why offer to pay for a test? Elena could have disappeared forever and raised the child in Canada, and he would never have known. But instead, she was giving him a choice that would determine the rest of his life. He printed out the forms and walked to a nearby medical clinic, his legs feeling like concrete. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, collected his saliva sample in a small tube. Is this for immigration? She asked in broken English, trying to make conversation. Something like that, Robert replied quietly, watching her seal the sample. 2 weeks later, he'd have his answer. 2 weeks to decide what kind of person he really was. During those agonizing 14 days, Robert barely slept. He found himself walking the beaches of Mactan Island at sunrise, thinking about his own absent father who'd left when Robert was just 3 years old. He remembered how that abandonment had shaped every relationship he'd ever had, how it had driven him to the Philippines in the first place, searching for someone who wouldn't leave him. Now he faced the possibility of being someone else's absent father. The irony was bitter and overwhelming. Every child he taught at the local school reminded him of what might be waiting for him in Canada. Every father walking hand in hand with his daughter made Robert's chest ache with possibility and regret. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning via email. Robert was eating breakfast at his usual spot, a tiny restaurant overlooking the harbor where fishermen brought in their daily catch. His phone buzzed, and he saw the lab's name in his inbox. For 5 full minutes, he couldn't bring himself to open it. When he finally did, the words blurred through his tears. The probability of paternity is 99.97%. Robert Campbell was a father. Elena's phone number was included in the lab report. With shaking hands, he dialed the Canadian number. She answered on the second ring, her voice tired but familiar. "I saw the results," she said before he could speak.
Elena.
His voice cracked. "I need to see her. I need to see my daughter." There was a long pause. In the background, Robert could hear a baby babbling, his baby. The sound hit him like a physical blow. "Robert, you have to understand something," Elena said carefully. "I'm not asking you to be her father. I'm not asking for money or for you to change your whole life. I just thought you had the right to know she exists. That's all. But I want to be her father," Robert said, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "I want to be part of her life." Elena was quiet for so long that Robert thought the call had dropped. Then she said something that changed everything. "Miguel found out about the baby being yours. He tried to take Sophia from me. That's why I had to run to Canada. He's still looking for us." Fear crashed over Robert like a cold wave. "Is she safe? Are you both safe?" "For now," Elena replied. "But Robert, if you get involved in her life, you'll be putting yourself in danger too. Miguel has connections everywhere. Family in America, in Canada. He won't stop until he gets revenge for what he sees as betrayal." Robert looked out at the peaceful harbor, watching children play in the sand while their parents worked nearby. A sudden clarity filled him. For months, he'd been angry at Elena for lying, for stealing, for breaking his heart. But now he understood something deeper. She hadn't just been protecting her own family. She'd been protecting him too. By disappearing, by not telling him immediately about the pregnancy, she'd kept him out of Miguel's crosshairs. "Send me your address," Robert said firmly. "I'm coming to Canada."
Robert. No.
"It's too dangerous. Miguel has people there too. Elena, I spent 60 years of my life running from things. Running from commitment, from responsibility, from my own family's mistakes. I won't run from my daughter. I won't let her grow up thinking her father abandoned her like mine did to me." There was another long pause. Then Elena began to cry. "I was so scared you'd hate us both." "I could never hate her," Robert said. "And Elena, what you did to survive, to protect your family, I understand it now. You made impossible choices. But I want to make sure Sophia never has to make those same choices." Over the next hour, they created a plan. Robert would fly to Toronto using his savings from teaching English. Elena had a small apartment in a Filipino community where Sophia would be safe. They'd have to be careful about Miguel's network, but Elena had friends who could help. 2 weeks later, Robert stood outside a modest apartment building in Scarborough, holding a small pink teddy bear he'd bought at the airport. His heart hammered in his chest as Elena opened the door. She looked older, more tired, but there was relief in her eyes when she saw him. "She's sleeping," Elena whispered, leading him into the tiny living room. Robert followed her to a small crib by the window. There she was, Sophia Campbell, 8 months old, with his green eyes and Elena's peaceful expression. She was perfect. absolutely perfect. When she opened her eyes and looked at him, Robert felt something shift forever inside his chest. A purpose he'd never known he needed. Elena handed him a bottle. "Would you like to feed her?" As Robert held his daughter for the first time, feeling her tiny hand wrap around his finger, he realized that everything that had happened, the deception, the heartbreak, the money, the fear, had led to this moment. This wasn't the love story he'd planned, but it was better. It was real. Sophia gurgled happily as she drank, her green eyes never leaving her father's face. And for the first time in his life, Robert Campbell understood what it meant to be exactly where he belonged. 6 months later, Robert had moved permanently to Toronto. He worked as an accountant for a Filipino-Canadian business, living in a small apartment just 10 minutes from Elena and Sophia. Miguel's threats had quieted after Elena's friends in the Filipino community made it clear that any harm to her or the baby would result in serious consequences. Elena and Robert never remarried. The trust had been broken too deeply for that. But they co-parented Sophia with a respect and understanding that went deeper than romantic love. They were two people who had hurt each other but chose to come together for someone they both loved more than themselves. On Sophia's first birthday, as Robert watched her take her first wobbling steps across Elena's living room, he realized something profound. He'd come to the Philippines looking for someone to complete him. Instead, he'd found someone who had broken him apart, only to help him rebuild into someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more capable of real love. The greatest gift Elena had given him wasn't her initial affection or even their daughter. It was the painful truth that had forced him to become the man Sophia would need her father to be. And that man, Robert discovered with deep satisfaction, was someone he was proud to be. Elena and Robert often spoke about their complicated past during quiet moments when Sophia slept between them on the couch. They talked about the choices they'd made, the pain they'd caused each other, and the miracle that had emerged from their broken love. They talked about how sometimes the cruelest betrayal can hide the most desperate act of protection, and how love isn't always enough to overcome impossible circumstances, but it can be enough to create something beautiful despite them. As Robert looked at his daughter's sleeping face, traced with features from both him and Elena, he understood that their story wasn't really about money or deception or even love in its traditional sense. It was about survival, sacrifice, and the extraordinary lengths people go to protect those they care about. It was about learning that sometimes being broken apart is the only way to be rebuilt into someone worthy of the love you receive. The man who had arrived in the Philippines searching for a fairy tale ending had found something far more valuable. A complicated, painful, real story that had taught him what it truly meant to be a father. And in his daughter's green eyes, so much like his own, Robert saw not just his genetic legacy, but his chance to break the cycle of abandonment that had marked his own childhood. Elena had cost him everything he'd saved, but she'd given him everything he'd never known he wanted. In the end, that seemed like the most honest kind of love there was.